Alright guys and girls, I'm back again. Today we're going to look at comparing and ordering our rational numbers. And we're going to do this in their fraction form, okay? I briefly mentioned that in the last video. This is the video where we're going to look at this. This is going to be a brief one because this is stuff we've done before again, so some of this is review. But the joy of the videos is that if you need more of that review, you can slow it down, rewatch it. If you've got it, you can move a little quicker at your own pace. So here I've given you three different numbers, and I'm going to give you the steps of how we're going to compare or order these. So these ones we're going to write in order from least to greatest. So the first thing I need to do is find my LCD. You'll recall from the last lesson that means least common denominator, which would be my least common multiple of my denominators. So I've already done that for you. If you've forgotten how to do that, watch the last video. The least common denominator is going to be 30. So then what we're going to do is we're going to write the equivalent fractions. That's also something that we looked at in the last lesson, so if you need to go back and rewatch that video, go ahead. So I put 30 on the bottom of all of them, then remember we just multiply the tops by the same factor. So 3 times 10 gave me the 30, I had to multiply the 2 by 10, I got 20 30ths. I did the same thing for the other two as well to rename them. Now I'm dealing with the same size pieces. I can just look at the numerators and compare them. So my numerators were 18, 20, and 25. So this is the order they would go in from least to greatest. So that means 18 30ths, which was originally 3/5, is the smallest number. So now when we're writing them in order, we're going to go back and we're still going to write our original form because we want to keep them in simplest form. So keep the fractions, when we're rewriting them, keep them in their original form. We still need to convert them so we know what order they go in, then we want to rewrite them this way. So 18 30ths was 3/5, that's going to come first. 20 30ths was 2/3, that's going to come next. And 25 30ths was 5/6, so that's going to come last. So they're from least to greatest here. And the biggest thing when we're writing things in order is to remember to pay attention which way I've asked you to do it. Does it say least to greatest or greatest to least? We don't want to make silly mistakes. All right, so now we'll just do some examples of that. On these first ones, I've just asked you to compare, tell me which one's bigger or smaller using our less than or greater than signs. All right. And the thing we want to remember here, you'll notice that these are negative. So remember, when we're dealing with negative numbers, it's the opposite. So you have to flip your thinking, okay? The larger the number, the larger the value, the smaller it is when it's negative. So it's backwards of the way that positive numbers work. So that's what whenever you see those negatives, you have to flip your thinking, opposite. So we still are going to start the same way. We want to come up with our least common denominator between 5 and 7, which is 35. I see that straight away. If you didn't, you could come over here and you could do your birthday cake. But if you look, 5 and 7 don't have any factors. So that means I'm just going to multiply them together to get my least common denominator. Now I'm going to rewrite my equivalent fractions so that I can compare them. I multiplied 5 by 7 to get 35, so I'm going to multiply the top by that as well. Also remember, these are negative numbers, so they're going to stay negative. 7 I multiplied by 5, so I need to do the same thing to the top, multiply 2 by 5. Now, if these were positive numbers, this would be the bigger number, right? But remember, we're dealing with negatives. So if it's easier, look at it and think positive and say this one's bigger, but they're negative, so it's going to be the opposite way. Or I should draw it up here actually in our original problem. So that actually means this is the larger number, or the less negative. Think of it as debt. I owe my parents money, I'd rather owe them less, so this is the better value. Okay? Here we have a mixed number, so what I do is the first thing I look at is my whole number. Those are both 8, so that means we can kind of ignore the 8s because they're the same number. So now we need to see which fraction is bigger. These are positive numbers, so it's going to be the way we're used to. So I want to find my least common multiple between 15 and 20. I notice that 5 will go into both of these. 3 and 4 don't have a common factor, so I'm going to multiply all those together. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 times 5 is 60. So I'm going to rewrite my fractions as 60ths. So 20 goes into 60 3 times, so that means I multiplied this by 3. I need to do the same thing to the top. 3 times 3 is 9. 15 goes into 60 4 times, so I multiplied the 15 by 4. I need to do the same thing to the 2, and I get 8/60ths. 9 is greater than 8. Pac-Man likes to eat the big side because he's hungry. So 3/20ths is slightly bigger than 2/15ths, not by much. Okay, again here we're dealing with negative numbers. Now what I notice is I have a decimal and a fraction. How are we going to deal with that? Well, I actually think it's probably easier to change my fraction into a decimal instead of going the other way around. So if you'll recall, to change a fraction into a decimal, we divide the top by the bottom number, and this is actually going to be a rather lengthy one, so I'm just going to round it off at the thousandth spot. I'm going to say it's approximately negative 0.286. So then we can look at our numbers here. And again, what I would do is I'd pretend they're positive and then write the opposite answer. So if these were positive numbers, looking at our place value, 4/10 is greater than 2/10. However, they're negative, so rather than going the way that I would normally, I'm going to flip my answer around. If these were positive, this would be bigger, but they're both negative, so that means actually my smaller number value is actually worth more because you're less in debt. Again, here we have negatives, so we need to flip our thinking and go backwards. So what I would do is I would convert this into its mixed number first, because if this gives me a number that is less than 2 or greater than 2, I don't even need to compare my fractions. It's going to be easier. 7 goes into 17 2 times with 3 left over. So I find that both of my whole numbers wound up being negative 2. So I can kind of just ignore that. I need to figure out which fraction is bigger now. So again, we want to look for our least common multiple between 9 and 7. I notice 9 and 7 don't have any factors, so that means I'm going to have to multiply them together to get my least common denominator. 9 times 7 gives me 63. So 63 is actually going to be my least common denominator for these. So I multiplied 9 times 7, so I need to multiply the top by 7. 4 times 7 is 28. Remember, these are negative. 7 I multiplied by 9, so I need to do the same thing to the top. 3 times 9 is 27. And again, if these were positive numbers, this would be bigger, but they're negative, so that means that actually it's the opposite way. So always remember, negatives, you need to flip your thinking and do it the opposite way of what you're used to. Okay, from here I've asked us to go least to greatest, okay? So again, you'll notice one of them is negative, one of them is positive. The positive one is pretty easy. The negative one, we need to flip our thinking. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find my least common denominator between 20, 15, and 5. If you'll recall, I already figured out that 20 and 15 has a common denominator of 60. So let's do 60 and 5 to find our least common multiple. So 5 will go into both of those. It goes into 60 12 times. It goes into 5 1 time. So now I'm going to multiply all these numbers together, and I get 60. So I find that my least common denominator between all three of these is indeed 60. So now we're going to rewrite these as equivalent fractions so we know which order they should go in. 20 goes into 60 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. 15 goes into 60 4 times. 4 times 2 is 8. 5 goes into 60 12 times. 12 times 1 is 12. And now I can see this is my smallest. Let me switch colors here. This is my smallest. This is my next. And that's going to be my third. So I'm going to write them 1, 2, 3. However, when I'm writing them, I now want to go back and write my original form. So 2/15 is my smallest, or my 8/60, but I'm going to write my original number. Then the 9/60, which was actually 3/20. Finally, my 1/5, which is 12/60. All right? There's no way to compare them without putting our denominators and making our denominators alike. So we want to keep that in mind. All right, let's take a look at number 6. This is the one where we need to flip our thinking because they're negative numbers. Same rules apply, though. We still need to come up with our common denominator. Our least common denominator. So I'll start with looking for my least common multiple of 3 and 8, and I notice they don't have any factors, so my least common multiple between 3 and 8 is 24. So I want to look at 24 and 5, which sadly do not have a common factor either. So that means I'm going to have to multiply them together. And here's where I'm going to cheat and use my handy dandy calculator to save us some time and make sure that the math is correct. When I multiply those, I get 120. So you'll notice we're actually dealing with a pretty big number here. Sadly, there is nothing smaller that will work. So we're going to rename all of these as fractions over 120. And again, you can use your calculator if you need to. But 3 goes into 120 40 times. Yes, 3, not 4. 3. So 40 times 2 is 80. 8 goes into 120 15 times. 15 times 3 gives me 45. And again, I'm going to write the negatives so we don't forget that these are opposites or negative numbers. 5 goes into 120 24 times. 24 times 4 is 96. Yes, I used my calculator. That one I did not do in my head. 96 times. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to flip our thinking because these are negative numbers. So that means I need to think backwards. So that means my biggest number is actually smallest, and my smallest number is actually the largest value. So remember that. Backwards thinking. And this is why I label them this way to help me remember. So that means my negative 4/5 goes first. And what you'll notice is I like to write them right underneath so I don't get confused as to which fraction was which fraction. All right, and then I know which way to write them. 2 is the negative 80/20ths, which was actually originally negative 2/3. And my last one, which was negative 45 over 120, which started out as negative 3/8. All right, so the big thing there is just to keep all those ideas in your mind and remember that you need to flip your thinking when you're dealing with negative numbers. If you have any questions, you know the drill, post them in the comments, email them. We'll talk about them in class. Feel free to rewatch the videos, to go back and rewatch any of the previous videos that you need to do to help refresh your memory on those principles. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow in class.